Welcome back to Notary Knowledge. I'm your host, Marylyn, and I am so thrilled you're joining us. Today, we're doing something a little special. We've dusted off the archives and are bringing you a standout conversation from the past. We have so many new listeners who might have missed this gem the first time around, and if you're a longtime listener, trust me, these are core signing principles you'll definitely want to refresh. So grab your notes, let's rewind the clock and jump right in. And remember, don't just be listeners of the knowledge, but be doers of the knowledge. I hope you enjoy.
Know the notary laws and safeguard your notary business. Introducing the book, Notary Law and Liability, Understanding State Regulations, Insurance, and Avoiding UPL by Derrick Spruill. What you don't know can destroy the notary business you've been building. Get your copy of Notary Law and Liability by Derrick Spruill from Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Books of Million, Bookshop.org, Mobile Notary by DerrickSpruill.com, or download from Kindle today.
Hello and welcome back to Notary Knowledge, the show where we really move past the basics and get into the real-world impact of our commission. I'm Eddie.
And I'm Marylyn. It's great to be here.
Today we are tackling something that, well, it really tests every single principle we've ever talked about on the show.
It really does. Integrity, impartiality, just basic operational resilience. We're focusing on the notary's role in post-disaster recovery.
Absolutely. You know, when we think of first responders, our minds go to firefighters, paramedics, right? But we often forget about the administrative backbone that lets a community actually start to rebuild.
That's it, exactly.
In our past conversations, we've gotten into the weeds on the how, the mechanics of an oath, how to verify an ID, the specifics of a journal entry. But today it's about the why it matters so much when everything has fallen apart.
And that's the critical shift in thinking. When a disaster hits, a hurricane, a wildfire, you name it, an entire ecosystem of aid mobilizes. You have state officials, NGOs, legal aid societies, housing providers, all rushing in.
Right.
But not a single one of them can move forward without verified, legally sound documents. People are displaced, their IDs might be gone, destroyed in a fire, or washed away in a flood.
And the notary becomes the linchpin.
The absolute linchpin. Your role goes from, a simple transactional witness to this essential pillar of stability. You're the one making sure survivors can actually access the funds, get the legal help, and secure the housing they so desperately need.
So that's our mission today. We are going to explore the unique legal questions and the frankly, chaotic practical challenges that notaries face when their own communities are compromised.
Yep.
It's about how the integrity of a piece of paper can transform chaos back into a legally enforceable reality.
And we have to start where all of our work starts.
Yeah.
So the non-negotiables. For anyone listening who is an experienced notary, you know what I'm talking about. The core principles.
The impartiality and intent.
Bedrock of the commission. And in a crisis, their importance is it's amplified tenfold.
The public trust is everything. We say it all the time. A notary can't have any financial or beneficial interest in the transaction. You can't be a party to the instrument. But, in a disaster zone, families are scattered, resources are thin, decisions are being made in a panic.
In that environment, even the appearance of a conflict of interest can be just as damaging as a real one.
So that brings us to the prohibitions against notarizing for family.
It's so crucial. We're talking about immediate family members related by marriage or by adoption. And while, some states might not have a hard and fast rule for every single cousin, the practice is universally, and I mean strongly, discouraged.
Right.
Just think about the perception. You've got a high-stakes document, maybe a power of attorney, that gives someone control over a big insurance payout. If that's notarized by a family member, you've just handed a legal challenger a reason to question it down the road.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second for our listeners who might find themselves in this exact situation. So imagine you're the only notary for 100 miles.
Yeah.
The roads are out, the power is spotty, and your sister-in-law needs a release form notarized right now to get into an emergency shelter. Doesn't the overwhelming public good, the duty to help, outweigh the risk of a minor technical conflict?
That is the classic ethical dilemma, isn't it? And it's a tough one, but the answer from a legal standpoint is, well, it's firm. No. Notarial integrity has to win out.
Even in that scenario?
Yes. Because if that document is ever challenged later, and believe me, high-value post-disaster documents are prime targets for lawsuits, a court is going to look straight at the impartiality of the notary.
And if they find that relationship?
The whole document and all the aid tied to it could be thrown out. invalidated. The notary's job isn't to prioritize convenience in the moment, it's to prioritize the long-term legal security of that act.
So you're saying you have to use every other option first.
Every single one. And that includes things like remote notarization, which we'll get to. You do that before you ever compromise your impartiality. The survivor's future, their legal stability, actually depends on you holding that line.
That really changes the stakes. You're not just helping with a signature today, you're protecting their legal standing for years to come.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift from the ethical to the purely physical. The reality of just keeping your tools, your seal, your commission, your journal, when your own home or office might be rubble.
This is operational resilience in its rawest form. Your official seal, your commission certificate, your journal, they are your personal property, but you absolutely cannot perform your duties without them. Losing them isn't just an inconvenience.
It means you can't practice, period.
Correct. And in the chaos of a disaster, the fires, the floods, the evacuations, these tools are so vulnerable. They can be lost, damaged, or even stolen.
So what's the first thing you have to do? The absolute time-sensitive requirement the second you realize your seal is gone.
This is a critical piece of information. The compliance window is unforgiving. If your seal or your journal is lost, stolen, or compromised in any way, you must deliver a signed notice of that fact to your commissioning authority.
Usually the Secretary of State.
Usually. And you have to do it within a very short, very specific time frame. Typically, it's just 10 days.
10 days. In a disaster zone. I mean, let's be real. The mail service is probably gone. Government offices might be closed or relocated. You, the notary, might be living in a shelter. How is that even possible?
It's incredibly difficult, and the authorities know that, but the deadline exists for a very good reason. A lost seal is a massive vulnerability. Imagine an unauthorized person getting their hands on a legitimate notary seal.
They could commit mass fraud.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Exactly. So if you miss that 10-day notification deadline, you're facing civil penalties. We're talking hefty fines and potentially even the suspension or revocation of your commission. The stakes are just immense.
And if it was stolen, there's another step, right? It's not just about telling the Secretary of State.
That's right. If you know it was stolen, you have a parallel duty to inform the appropriate law enforcement agency.
Why both?
Well, it's a dual notification. For law enforcement, the seal is evidence in a crime. But just as importantly, it flags the system that fraudulent documents might start appearing in the public record, all bearing your stolen seal.
We did see some really crucial examples of governments adapting after major disasters. They seem to recognize how hard this was.
Yes, that organizational resilience is key. I know of one instance after a major hurricane where the Secretary of State's office didn't just wait for notaries to try and figure out the mail, they acted fast.
What did they do?
They set up a dedicated immediate response portal online specifically for notaries to request replacement seals and journals.
So they streamlined the process.
They did. Because the state recognized that every single day a notary is out of commission, the recovery timeline for the whole community gets longer. By fast-tracking those replacements, they were essentially injecting legal certainty back into the local economy. It let housing deals, insurance claims, all that vital paperwork start moving again.
This idea of governments adapting brings us to a bigger legal concept that can sometimes give notaries a bit of breathing room. The idea of force majeure.
It's a very powerful legal tool. Force majeure basically refers to an unavoidable, unforeseeable event, like a natural disaster, that makes it impossible for someone to meet a legal or contractual obligation. And we have seen governments specifically invoke this for notaries.
So the government is basically hitting a pause button. They're saying, we get it. Things are impossible right now.
That's a perfect way to put it. We saw specific instances where government actions terminated certain financial and administrative liabilities for notaries in declared disaster zones.
Okay, let's break that down. The source material mentioned things like return of payments against receipts and trade registry notifications. What do those mean in plain English?
Okay, so return of payments against receipts. This usually refers to fees or revenue that a notary collects and has to report and send to the state on a regular schedule, like quarterly.
Right.
But after a disaster, your office, your records, your bank access, it could all be gone. How can you possibly tally up and remit payments when your entire financial infrastructure has been wiped out?
You can't. It's impossible. And the trade registry notifications.
That often applies to notaries who also run a business and have to file regular updates or pay fees to a trade registry. Again, right after a catastrophe, your focus is on survival, on helping your community, not filling out routine government forms.
So by declaring force majeure, The government was formally pausing or extending those deadlines, in one case pushing them out by months.
Precisely. It's a formal acknowledgement that insisting on business as usual administrative compliance during an impossible situation is. Well, it's counterproductive and, frankly, it's cruel. It signals that the notary's focus needs to be entirely on the mission of helping survivors.
Okay, we've covered the grim reality on the ground, the ethical tightropes, the lost tools, the physical barriers. It sounds pretty bleak.
It can be.
But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back to Notary Knowledge, we're going to talk about the one innovation that can cut right through all that chaos: remote online notarization. Don't go anywhere. And we are back on Notary Knowledge. Before the break, we laid out how a physical disaster could just completely shut down a notary's ability to practice in the traditional in-person way.
It can, but, recent history has fundamentally changed what in the presence of a notary can actually mean.
You're talking about the explosion in remote online notarization, or on.
Absolutely. The need to keep legal processes going during widespread displacement, it led to this crisis-driven, really dramatic acceleration in RON adoption. You have to remember, before 2020, only about 13 states permanently allowed it.
Right. The public health crisis really showed the need for a remote option when being physically present just isn't possible, whether it's because of a virus or a hurricane.
Exactly. The function is invaluable when people are displaced. They could be in a shelter across town or staying with family 3 states away. RON bridges that gap.
For anyone who might not be fully up to speed, RON uses two-way audio-video conferencing to let the notarization happen, which satisfies that legal requirement for the signer to appear before the notary.
Yes, but it's so much more than just a video call. Let's get down to the brass tacks and walk through the core steps that really ensure the integrity of a RON transaction. These digital steps have to replace the certainty you get in person, looking someone in the eye, physically handling their ID.
Okay, so first, the notary has to be actively watching the signer sign the document through a secure video conference. That live video feed is the legal substitute for physical presence.
Correct. And a small but important detail for your journal, the official date and time of the notarization, is the exact moment you witness that signature on video. But where the process gets really intense is on identity verification.
Right, because this is where the fraud risk is highest.
It is. The signer has to show a valid photo ID of the video, but that's just the start. This is where the technology really kicks in.
This is way more than just holding your driver's license up to the webcam.
Oh, miles beyond that. The ARM platform has to perform automated credential analysis. That means the software is actually checking the security features on the ID itself, and then it has to do dynamic identity proofing.
And that usually means a knowledge-based authentication assessment, a KBA.
Yes. Let's dig into the mechanics of the KBA for a minute, because it's a critical anti-fraud tool, especially in a crisis when people might be trying to impersonate a survivor.
So what is it exactly?
The KBA is basically a very fast, very specific quiz. It pulls questions from huge public and private databases, things that only the real person would know. It's not, what's your mother's maiden name? It's more like, which of these 5 addresses have you been associated with? Or, which of these amounts matches a mortgage you took out in 2004?
Things a fraudster couldn't just find on social media.
Exactly. And the requirements are so rigorous. The signer typically has to get 80% correct on 5 or more multiple choice questions, and they only have about 2 minutes to do it.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure, especially for someone already under stress.
It is, but it's necessary. It validates a person's deep history in a way a simple ID can't. And to prevent fraud, the retake rules are incredibly strict.
What happens if you fail?
If you fail that first attempt, you usually get one more chance within 24 hours. But here's the key. For that retake, a big chunk of the questions, often 40%, have to be new.
Ah, so someone can't just be sitting next to them, writing down the answers and coaching them for the second try.
That's the idea. And if you fail that second attempt, you're locked out from using that specific online notary for a full 24 hours. This whole intensive process is designed to make the remote act as secure, or even more secure, than an in-person one.
That really underscores the security involved. So, okay, identity is confirmed, signature is witnessed. What happens to the document, and what's the notary's responsibility for the recording of the session?
The documents are returned to the notary digitally, where they're certified and converted into a tamper-evident electronic record. But the long-term part is crucial for liability. The notary has to keep a complete audio-video recording of the entire conference.
Of how long?
Usually for a specific period, often 5 years from the date of the notarization.
So that recording is a digital safety net.
It is. If, 3 years after a flood, an insurance company or a relative challenges a document that was signed via Aron, that recording is the proof. It shows the identity was checked, the sire was willing, and everything was done correctly.
It secures the whole process long after the crisis is over. Okay, let's talk about the biggest benefit of RON for survivors. Notarizing across borders.
This is the true lifeline. This is where physical barriers just cease to matter. Our sources confirm that 36 states have laws that honor documents that were notarized in another state as long as it was done legally according to that other state's laws. It's called interstate recognition.
So let me get this straight. Even if a survivor is temporarily in a state that doesn't allow its own notaries to perform RON,
Yes.
they can still connect with a notary who is commissioned in a state that does allow RON. The legality follows the notary's commission, not where the signer is physically sitting.
You've got it. The examples are dramatic. We've seen cases of a survivor who lost their home, flew to Shanghai to stay with family, and connected with a RON notary back in, say, Virginia to execute a critical affidavit for their recovery. Or a military member stationed overseas whose property back home was destroyed. They can execute their sworn proof of loss statement for their insurance company using RON. The legal significance is just huge.
It completely removes displacement as a bottleneck to their recovery.
It does. And the acceptance is only getting wider. A subset of those states, about 15 of them, have almost no limitations at all on accepting documents completed via RON from another state. This just dramatically expands a notary's reach and a survivor's access to help when they are at their most vulnerable.
Okay, let's pivot to the documents themselves. After the immediate crisis passes, we enter that long, slow recovery phase. And this is where the notary becomes absolutely central to unlocking the money and legal help people need.
The paperwork for housing and financial aid is, it's complex, it's highly regulated, and it involves enormous amounts of public money. We're talking about big programs like state-level housing strategies or FEMA's individual assistance program.
What kind of immediate help are we talking about that needs a notarized document?
All sorts. Funds for temporary rent. Money for emergency repairs to make a home livable again. And one of those critical first steps, funds to pay a homeowner's property insurance deductible.
That deductible can be a huge barrier.
It can be thousands of dollars, and for a family that's just lost everything, that check for $1,000 to maybe $5,000 is often the very first financial lifeline they get.
And the notary is there to make sure the right person is getting that lifeline.
Exactly. These applications are so sensitive, they require formalized, notarized eligibility releases. To get federal or state housing aid, you have to sign legal documents that allow third parties, the state, the agency, a vendor, to verify your personal information.
Like income, assets?
Income, assets, even child support payments, all of it. That level of scrutiny is required to prove you're eligible, and those releases have to be notarized. The notary is acting as the gatekeeper for public funds.
You're protecting the taxpayer from fraud right at the source.
That's a great way to put it. And on top of that, there's a huge focus on checking for what's called a duplication of benefits, or DOB.
To prevent people from double dipping, right? Getting paid by FEMA and their insurance company for the exact same roof repair.
Precisely. FEMA has to make sure its finite resources are distributed fairly. Now, sometimes a case manager can get verbal consent for a quick check, but for ongoing complex cases, they often need formal written consent for FEMA to release records to caseworkers.
And that written consent form is a legal document.
It is, and it absolutely requires notarization to be legally sound.
Okay, let's talk about the single biggest financial piece for most survivors, their insurance claim. This feels like the place where a notary is almost guaranteed to be involved.
This is a core function in the rebuilding phase. Your insurance policy always spells out your duties after a loss. You have to give immediate notice, try to mitigate further damage, cooperate with their inspectors, and then you have to submit your final sworn proof of loss statement.
And that word sworn is where we come in.
That's the whole ballgame. The sworn statement in proof of loss is the legally binding document that unlocks the money. On that form, the signer has to affirm, under penalty of perjury, that everything they're claiming is true and accurate to the best of their knowledge.
So it's a classic jurat. The notary is administering an oath or affirmation.
It's the textbook definition. And the level of detail is incredible. You don't just write, my kitchen was destroyed. No. You have to itemize 40 linear feet of custom cabinetry at X dollars per foot, one Sub-Zero refrigerator, model number Y, valued at Z, you're swearing before the notary that those values, those details are truthful. The financial weight of that one notarial act can easily be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And the insurance company relies on that sworn statement to cut the check. And if there's a mortgage on the house, that check is usually co-payable to both the homeowner and the mortgage company.
That's right.
So if there's any fraud in that proof of loss, the whole transaction could collapse. The notary's jurat is literally the foundation that financial transfer is built on.
It is. The notarized document is the final legal assurance of legitimacy. And beyond insurance, survivors often need legal help for all sorts of things. Denied claims, contractor fraud, which sadly spikes after disasters.
That's where legal aid services come in. The ABA disaster legal hotlines, groups like that, they help survivors with these complex issues, and that help almost always requires sworn affidavits and declarations that have to be notarized to have any weight in court.
And that brings us to one last very critical document, the power of attorney. Often executed in really high-stress medical situations right after a disaster. If a survivor is injured or too weak to manage their own affairs, a POA might be the only way for their family to access funds or make medical decisions.
This takes us back to something we've discussed before, the heightened rules for notarizing a signature by mark.
Wow.
Imagine the scene. You're called to a crowded medical tent, an overwhelmed shelter. The patient is so weak they can only make an X.
The need for proper protocol is just paramount in that moment. To notarize a signature by mark, the law requires you to have two disinterested witnesses, and that's in addition to you, the notary.
And disinterested is the key word there. What does it mean in that specific high-stress context?
It means that neither of those two witnesses can be named in the document or benefit from it financially. So, for example, if the patient is signing a POA that names their daughter as the agent,
The daughter cannot be one of the witnesses.
she cannot. The witnesses have to be totally outside the legal and financial scope of that document. Their only job is to provide unbiased testimony that they saw the patient willingly make that mark. It's a rule that protects the person when they are at their absolute most vulnerable.
That protocol ensures the notary and the witnesses are the final protectors of that person's will, making sure the POA is legally sound and not the result of confusion or coercion.
And that vulnerability is the perfect transition to our last big topic, the importance of ethical vigilance in a disaster zone. We have to talk about protecting signers who are under extreme duress.
The risk of cutting corners, of overlooking a critical step, it just multiplies in a crisis environment. Stress and desperation are, unfortunately, perfect breeding grounds for fraud.
So we have to be more diligent than ever. We have to go back to the fundamental steps. You verified the ID, of course. You confirm the signer is present physically or remotely. But then you have to go deeper.
It's more than physical presence. It's about their mental state.
Exactly. You have to ask yourself two things. Does this person truly comprehend what they are signing? And are they proceeding willingly?
And comprehension is so hard to judge when someone is traumatized. They've just lost their home. And now a contractor is shoving a complex lien document in their face. They might just sign anything to make it stop.
And that's where the notary has to step in. If you can't communicate effectively with the signer, if they seem confused or incapacitated, you cannot proceed. And this applies to the document, too. It has to be complete. A jurat, like for those insurance claims, absolutely cannot be performed on a document that has blank spaces.
Why is that rule so important post-disaster?
Because the person is swearing to the completeness and accuracy of the document as it exists at that moment. A blank space is an invitation for fraud. Someone could go back later and fill in a higher dollar amount or add a whole new clause after it's been notarized. Your job is to shut down that possibility.
Which leads directly to the notary's highest ethical duty, which is sometimes the duty to refuse service.
It is an absolute duty. You must refuse if you have any reasonable suspicion that the signer is being coerced, is under undue influence, or just doesn't have the mental capacity to understand what's happening.
So you're the last line of defense.
That's what it is. The sources are clear on this. Financial exploitation spikes after disasters, and it often targets the elderly or the displaced who are isolated from their support systems.
So if you see a younger relative kind of pushing an elderly survivor to sign an estate document too quickly, or a contractor hovering over a homeowner, that's reasonable suspicion. That's grounds for refusal.
It is, but, and this is a very important but, we have to talk about the other side of that coin, which is improper refusal.
Right. We are public officials. We have a ministerial duty. We don't get to pass moral judgment on the document itself.
That is the fine ethical line you have to walk. You can't refuse a lawful, proper notarization because of a personal bias. You don't like the signer's background, their lifestyle, whatever. You also can't refuse just because you disagree with the content of the document.
Our job is to verify identity and willingness. That's it. We're not endorsing the document's purpose.
Exactly. If the notarial act requested is legal and the signer is identified, willing, and competent, you must notarize. Refusing because you're nervous or you just don't understand the document is an improper refusal.
And because that decision to refuse is so significant, it can stop a critical transaction in its tracks. You have to document it.
Always, without fail. You note it in your journal, the date, the people involved, and the specific reason for the refusal. Something like, refused jurat because document contained blank financial fields, or refused due to reasonable suspicion of third-party coercion of an elderly signer.
That journal entry is your proof that you upheld your ethical duty and potentially stopped an act of fraud or exploitation.
And as we wrap up here, I think it's important to just reflect on that unique dual role the notary plays in these situations. It's this combination of professional self-governance and essential public service.
On one hand, you have that internal mandate. You're a guardian of professional standards. You're fighting the chaos to protect your journal and seal. You're hitting that strict 10-day notice if they're lost. You're maintaining absolute impartiality.
And then there's the external role, the public-facing role. You're the enabler of recovery. You're using tools like RON to overcome displacement. You're authenticating the mountains of paperwork for insurance, for FEMA, for housing. Without the notary, the entire rebuilding process it grinds to a halt.
It's clear the impact a notary has is huge, especially on long-term community recovery. By making sure all that emergency paperwork is legally valid, you are actively helping your community move from temporary shelters to actually rebuilding permanent housing. You're this quiet, essential force turning trauma into legal stability.
And after every major disaster, we see governments and legal bodies rushing to adapt policy. We talked about force majeure declarations, the emergency expansion of RON. The system recognizes how critical notaries are, but usually only after the disaster has already hit.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listener, to think about until the next time we're together on Notary Knowledge. Given how absolutely critical legal documentation is in the recovery process, should specialized emergency preparedness training for notaries, I'm talking mock crisis notarizations, mandated and regularly renewed RON education, should that be a formal, required part of getting and keeping your commission nationwide?
Should we mandate preparedness for this indispensable role? Or do we keep relying on these reactive, temporary policy fixes after the damage is done? It's a question that really connects our professional responsibility directly to public safety and resilience.
A powerful question to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly important topic.
It's my pleasure. It's an honor to talk about the real weight of this commission.
And a huge thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We will be back soon with more on how the notary public keeps the wheels of commerce and justice turning. Until then, stay safe and be ready to adapt when your community needs you most.
Fraud is a constant threat to your notary commission. You need a shield. The book by Derrick Spruill, Notary Fraud Shield, could provide you with some advice. Learn real-world tactics, notice red flags, and develop refusal strategies to protect your notary commission. Buy your copy of Notary Fraud Shield by Derrick Spruill from any online bookstore, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble Bookstore, booksofmillion.com, bookshop.org, Mobile Notary by DerrickSpruill.com, or download from Kindle to obtain your essential notary book to help with all your notarization starting today.